Good evening, everybody. Another installment of your favorite late night random YouTube stream. If I have any competitors out there for your favorite late night random YouTube stream, inform me of who those individuals are, and I'll go and give them a piece of my mind. Tell them to delete their account. Tell them, how dare you? How dare you vie with me, the supreme, ultimate YouTube streaming late night random champion? I wipe my butt with you, fellow late night random YouTube streamer. And I hope you also appreciate that my late night streams have a bit of a film noir quality, because they tend to be in dark, mysterious rooms with generic features and with only my face really illuminated. Somebody says, if you did drugs, you would be the Hunter S. Thompson of our generation. Well, no comment on whether or not I've done drugs, but let's just say if that were true, then I'd presently be the Hunter S. Thompson of our generation. Somebody gives me a very nice super chat, and the individual goes by the name of Vladimir Putin and says that I'm a dumb mother. Okay. I'll accept that if you're going to give me money. Call me any word, any name you want under the sun, as long as you give me money. So now I guess I can finally be accused legitimately of taking payments directly from the Kremlin, now that Vlad has decided to give me a super chat. You really blew my cover. So I might have inverted the name of this stream slightly. It perhaps should have been that Bernie is hereby canceled as a result of accepting and publicizing the quasi endorsement of Joe Rogan. Now, to call it an endorsement, I think, is a little much. An endorsement is when somebody issues like a press release and formally declares that they hereby support X, Y, or Z candidate, or X, Y, or Z issue, or what have you, usually a candidate. And this is just a guess, but I don't think Joe Rogan has a formal endorsement process that has to go through various subcommittees and has to abide by a variety of strictures set forth in the charter of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. So maybe to call it an endorsement is a little much. But Joe Rogan did say he was going to probably vote for Bernie. Now, you may remember that I believe it was last May, and I covered it here on this very channel. Joe Rogan said that he was going to be voting for Tulsi. And you might think, wow, Joe Rogan changed his mind and he abandoned Tulsi and is voting for Bernie now. No, I don't really think that explains it. I think Joe Rogan just kind of goes on these stream of consciousness riffs on his podcast, which if you've watched it at all, you're familiar with, and says whatever is at the forefront of his mind on a given occasion. So maybe he still will vote for Tulsi. Maybe he'll vote for Bernie. Maybe he'll vote for Yang. Maybe he won't vote at all. Does he have his voter registration stuff figured out in California for the primary? Who knows? But it is notable that people hang on his every word such that they kind of portray his musings as constituting an endorsement. There was an entire news cycle today and yesterday having to do with Joe Rogan's statement that he supported Bernie. Now, Bernie did publicize that endorsement, or his campaign did, rather, and I'm assuming he signed off on it, but who knows? He might have been locked in his impeachment chamber at the time. And they put the Bernie branding logo on it, and they publicized it and tweeted it out. And that's what made people lose their minds, or at least some people. Now, there was a lot of pushback to the people who were outraged, but the people who were outraged said that because Joe Rogan has a history of making, quote, bigoted statements, it is horrific and unacceptable and intolerable for Bernie to embrace the support from such an individual. When I first saw this, I was a little bit incredulous that there could have been such a backlash, but there was a genuine backlash, at least within the media, at least within elements of the left, online left media, left liberal media, who were saying, wow, if Bernie, I even saw one guy who, was careful not to be too judgmental. Just playing the journalist card. Guy at the LA Times, who I follow for some time, occasionally has some decent insights. He said, I'm not going to begrudge Bernie for engaging in some realpolitik. Realpolitik, not real. I'm thinking of Real Madrid. This is what happens when I do these streams late at night. This guy said he's not going to begrudge Bernie for engaging in some realpolitik and accepting the endorsement of somebody who is widely regarded as a white right winger, which he isn't, but he's widely perceived as such. And this guy noted that it's ironic for Bernie to do so because Bernie supporters often malign Democrats for triangulating and making trade-offs. So this guy was equating Bernie putting out a little endorsement video, or at least statement of support video, from Joe Rogan to Democrats' attempts over the years to forge bipartisan consensus solutions, usually by just totally reneging on their commitments and supporting whatever the corporatist pro-war position is. Or in other words, there's just no equivalency there whatsoever between the typical concessions that Democrats make. They want to bring on centrists and stuff and Republicans onto their agenda, and what Bernie did here. For one, Bernie didn't make any concessions. He didn't alter his views. He didn't change around his commitments. He just recognized that a highly influential individual made a statement of supportive statement about him, decided to publicize it. I think if you spend any time on the internet and you're aware of new media, online media, you should be pretty familiar with the influence of Joe Rogan. But what certain people who never watch him and don't know anything about his political sensibility, to the extent that he really has a political sensibility, all they did was they found unearthed these clip montages of Joe Rogan talking about like transgender issues with right-leaning guests. And they coupled that all together and said, wow, Bernie has to disavow this. And it's just like, no. Okay, I'm going to interrupt my stream of thought and read a couple super chats. Sparky says, Joe and everyone else shouldn't be so anxious to give up on Tulsi. The military-industrial complex and their pawns in the media keep her down. See, again, I don't know that he's given up on her. I don't know that's the right way to characterize it. He was just sort of in the moment riffing on his potentiality of voting for Bernie. And just last week, Joe Rogan said, or he at least claimed, that he had been contacted by representatives from Biden, Mayor Pete, and Warren for them to get on the podcast, and he turned them down because, in Rogan's words, he likes Tulsi and he likes Bernie, and everybody else can eat shit. That's what Joe Rogan said. So Obviously, he still likes her. It's just a matter of what his frame of mind is in terms of his voting decision on a given day. Somebody says Russiagate liberals dilute the term right winger. Yeah, I would say that Joe Rogan kind of represents a sensibility that does have appeal among certain type flavors of right winger. Just because he's obviously opposed to the kind of hyperventilating, performative, online outrage brigades who tend to be associated with the left, even though there's nothing inherently left about how those people operate. In fact, you can make an argument that they are enemies of the left because they fixate on these trivialities and try to impose speech codes and are so identity fixated that they obscure what a genuine left program could look like. And they create a false perception among the wider populace of what your principles have to be if you do subscribe to a left wing outlook. Bernie, although at times he does indulge in some of this identity stuff, it's not his burning passion. It's not why he's in politics, right? He's in politics because he wants to create class consciousness amongst the working class and redistribute wealth away from the billionaires and into the broad breadth of society who tend to be less of beneficiaries of the enormous wealth that the U.S. generates. So, to him, some of these identity screechy fixations, I think on some level he does support their general aims, but it's not going to be what he personally emphasizes. And so he can get along with a guy like Joe Rogan, who's sort of, likes his guns, doesn't like political correctness, kind of open-minded, maybe thinks that the establishment's corrupt, thinks that most politicians are full of you-know-what. Bernie comes along. He's consistent almost to a fault. He is willing to have an open dialogue with somebody like Rogan. And, that I thought was actually one of the best interviews or appearances in the media that I've ever seen Bernie do. Just because it was open-ended. It wasn't constrained by these arbitrary time limitations. It wasn't all about trying to play gotcha. And Rogan's not a journalist, so you expect him to approach an interview like that in that way. We did the same with Tulsi. You did the same with Yang. And there's a lot of value to those kinds of conversations. It's maybe not quite how I would approach one of those conversations because I have a little bit more of a journalistic background. So my instinct is to at least try to probe potential inconsistencies in a politician's stated agenda. Try to maybe hold them to account for certain again logical pitfalls that they might be espousing in my estimation. But Rogan operates almost more as like a curious observer rather than somebody who's going to be interrogating them. So that's why I thought Bernie had a hospitable audience on that podcast, and it did insanely well. I don't know what the latest YouTube view count is, but within a couple of days, it was many, many millions. And you have to multiply that by the number of podcast downloads, and there's nothing to be lost if you're in Bernie's position by going on that show, and everything to be gained. And I think that the fact that Rogan found him impressive probably contribute to why now he says that he probably would support him. Sparky says Rogan isn't right wing. He's a pro Second Amendment progressive, just like Bernie. Yeah, to say that Bernie is pro Second Amendment now is a little iffy, just because he did have to abandon some of the more idiosyncratic anti-gun control positions that he, for example, espoused back when he was in his earlier years in Vermont. I remember I wrote a piece on this in the last election cycle, which I should go look up again. But in 2015, in the summer of 2015, when Bernie was first gaining traction, I spent about a week in the Bernie archive at the University of Vermont in Burlington. I went through many of his old mayoral papers, and that included some of the papers and documents from when he was in this sort of fringe third. I don't want to say fringe, that's a little bit of a pejorative, but when he was in this slightly marginal third party called the Liberty Union Party in Vermont. That's the party under which he first ran for office when he was, I believe, in his 30s. And if you go and look at the policy statement that the Liberty Union Party ratified when Bernie was a member, it was pro-gun rights on sort of liberatory left-wing grounds. And as Bernie progressed through his career and got elected to Congress, he did sort of object around the margins to some of the prevailing Democratic Party views on gun control, which in a way was just a representation of what his constituents wanted, because for the longest time there was virtually no gun control at all in Vermont. And recently I think they did adopt an assault weapons ban. I don't have the exact phrasing on what that ban consisted of, but I know that's true. And so he's sort of evolved to some extent, but the irony is, if he just kind of kept to the position that he long held as the representative and then senator from Vermont with regard to gun control, it probably would have been to his political benefit, because it's sort of a little bit of a middle ground position. So you don't have people screaming that you're going to, take their guns away, and yet you can still compromise on certain legislative initiatives to curtail aspects of gun rights. And I believe he did talk about that on the Joe Rogan podcast back when he appeared on it. When was that? In June or something. Let's see. Sparky has another comment. Chris says, Joe Rogan is exactly the sort of person that a working class movement should be very happy to have won over. Yeah, again, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say he's been won over, right? He was just in this momentary back and forth with the guest and said, yeah, I'll probably vote for Bernie. So it's not as if he's now a full-fledged member of the Bernie movement. But if he is contemplating voting for him, or he says he probably will, then yeah, it just shows that Bernie's able to have a cross-ideological appeal. And in fact, if you go back and look at the 2016 primaries, Bernie overperformed significantly in rural counties where there was a disproportionate number of conservative voters as compared to Hillary. So Bernie did well, much better than you might expect with self-described conservative voters in the Democratic primary. Now, maybe part of that owed to the fact that he was simply the only person running against Hillary. But if Bernie was just a typical liberal insurgent candidate, which in a way Warren kind of is now, that you wouldn't have expected him to have garnered that kind of appeal. So that's why when Bernie gets depicted as just the latest version, and this sort of more applies to 2016 than this cycle, but going back to 2016, there was often a theme that compared Bernie to like a Howard Dean or something, who is sort of seen as the progressive insurgent candidate, and that really didn't apply so much to Bernie, because a lot of these so-called liberal insurgent candidates win like affluent suburban highly educated localities. Bernie got wiped out in all those localities by Hillary. So I'm thinking of, like, for example, Marin County, California, or Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Montclair, New Jersey. Those are places that your ordinary liberal insurgent candidate would do well. But Bernie did not do well in those places because he sort of posed a challenge to their accumulated wealth. But he did do well in more downscale localities. And so the framing of Bernie as a liberal insurgent was never right. And, we'll see how that, we'll see if that's borne out in this current race. I think it probably will, to a large degree, with some differences. But yeah. Sparky has another comment. Since Trump isn't really being opposed in the primary, Trump supporters should cross over and vote for Tulsi. It'll keep Trump from listening to Pompeo. You're going to have to explain to me how Trump supporters voting for Tulsi is going to prevent Trump from personally listening to Pompeo. I think so long as Pompeo is Secretary of State, Trump is going to continue listening to him. So if you have a problem with Pompeo exerting the influence that he does, you should take your complaints to Trump, who appointed him into that position, transferred him seamlessly from the CIA to the State Department. And now Mike Pompeo is the one who's running U.S. foreign policy to a large extent. But your point is right in a way. In New Hampshire, where I've been now to every Tulsi event since the 29th of last month, so a lot. There are Trump supporters who usually are in attendance. So often what she'll do is she'll survey the crowd and ask, how many of you are Democrats? How many of you are independents? How many of you are Republicans? And there's usually a pretty even share amongst all three. Sometimes there's more independents than anybody else, because that's sort of the ethos in New Hampshire in a way. And independents can vote in the primary in New Hampshire in particular. And New Hampshire is where she's devoting all her campaign resources. So it's New Hampshire or bust for her. And when I say bust, I don't mean that she's necessarily going to drop out if she doesn't perform as well as she'd like in New Hampshire, but New Hampshire is where she's hoping to get a good result. But the issue is, some of these disaffected Trump supporters are who would consider voting for Tulsi, and many of them have told me personally that she's the only Democrat that they would ever even consider voting for. Which is why I think, in a theoretical scenario, this is way down the line, don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but if Bernie were to get the nomination, Tulsi, I think, could be a major electoral asset by appealing to some people that are of the Joe Rogan ilk, in a way, who maybe like Bernie, maybe a little bit apprehensive about the whole socialism thing. Tulsi herself is not an ideological socialist activist, right? Even if she's in accordance with much of the much of the Bernie program. So she could sort of be an emissary to those types and say, hey, what, we're cool. I just think I can envision a scenario where she could be a major benefit to Bernie in terms of reaching certain constituencies that maybe he's not naturally disposed to talking to. On top of that, she's also a woman. I know she doesn't get a lot of credit for being a woman, and actually a history-making woman. Remember, she was the youngest woman ever elected to any state legislature in the United States. And I've talked to her about this, and I don't know how great of an idea it is for most people anyway, to be elected to the state legislature at 21. I'm not sure I would have done a great job necessarily at 21, but women's brains mature at greater rates than men, so maybe that's to her advantage. So she has some history. She would have history-making potential there, as obviously the first woman ever elected to be vice president. And so, you might get some women coming around to her and having sort of like a quasi identity argument for why they would back that ticket, even if they have some reservations about Bernie. Now, I don't think your Tulsi would play the identity card much, but obviously it's a factor. um, Somebody, Thomas, gives me a super chat for referring to Schiff's insufferable oratory as a soliloquy, the perfect term. I mean, it is a soliloquy. What is a soliloquy? It's when as opposed to a colloquy. A soliloquy is when one person just goes on a rambling, extended exercise in oratory. And that's what Schiff has been doing over the course of this trial. For 3 straight days, he's talked for like 8 hours a day. Not quite that much, but enough where it does become extremely insufferable. Last night I was talking about my C-SPAN radio app. So that's where how I listen to some of it today. It's just like, really, Adam Schiff feels like he's in a position to lecture both the Senate and the entire national viewing audience about the meaning of moral courage. He was invoking, the Kennedys and Schiff's father. I don't even remember what the relevance was. He was talking about Schiff's father signing up to go fight World War II, and the war ended, and he couldn't go, and then he went into business. It didn't make any sense as to what the relevant was, but it was all part of this routine where Schiff was saying that it's the solemn, historic responsibility of the senators who were jurors in the trial to put aside their party's interests and vote to convict Trump. It's just like, how is Adam Schiff being presented to us, being put before us as somehow this authority on the meaning of moral or political courage? I mean, there's almost nobody else on earth whose pontifications on moral courage I would take less seriously. His conduct over the course of the Russiagate saga was just abysmal. He was one of the worst offenders. And he paid no price for it, of course. His false and flawed and just bogus assessments made up about Mueller and Russia and collusion caused him to incur no penalty at all. In fact, he was rewarded because he became such a household name. Maybe not household name, but he became a prominent figure in the political world, one of the most prominent. And so he got rewarded for that with this high profile. And the Democrats said, here's your prize. You get to lead our entire impeachment effort. You get to be the one who's on TV for 8 hours a day, rhapsodizing about the duties of the senators to believe what you're saying, or at least believe in your rationale for why removing Trump is the only viable option if you're a moral person, which I think is nonsensical, especially coming from him, who's probably the worst representative that the Democrats could have picked. Although Gerald Nadler is a close second, and Gerald Nadler, I don't know if you saw this, but Gerald Nadler went on another tirade tonight where he's saying Trump is a dictator. Trump is a dictator because he declined to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry. Now, was Trump dictatorial when he did cooperate with the Mueller investigation? When he handed over, I don't know how many documents, allowed for his underlings to testify, himself submitted questions, didn't shut down the investigation, which is what alarmists were declaring was going to happen at any moment over the course of the special counsel investigation proceeding. Was his behavior dictatorial there? Trump has been thwarted and subverted at every turn. Not at every turn, but often he's been thwarted and subverted by his subordinates as president. He could barely get a legislative agenda passed without delegating it out to Paul Ryan. He's operating within a reasonable checks and balance system in per the precedents of U.S. governance. So why do they feel like they have to get engaged in this like catastrophic hyperbole about how we're now being governed by a dictator? If Gerald Nadler believes that we're in a dictatorship, then he should be taking more extreme action to oppose that than simply ranting in the well of the Senate chamber and talking about Ukraine phone calls. I mean, Gerald Nadler should go get in the trenches. He should make good on his resistance pledge and start some real underground resistance groups, in which case the Second Amendment might be a little bit more appealing to him. But that's not what he's going to do. He doesn't believe. I do not believe that Nadler believes his own rhetoric. And that's been a feature of a lot of the rhetoric around Trump. Some of it is so extreme, so apocalyptic, that if the people who espoused it actually believed it, like that Trump was going to bring fascism to the U.S., that he was going to be a dictator, that he was going to open up the nationwide concentration camps, that he was going to basically upend the entire system of constitutional governance in the U.S., that he was roughly, a successor to Hitler. That was all said, and I have the receipts, as the kids say, on it, because I followed it contemporaneously. You don't see as much of it now, but it was at a fever pitch in 2016, 2017 in particular. And you still see a little bit of it now and then, where people have these most grandiose depictions of what Trump supposedly is in terms of being a dictator or what have you. It's just like, if that's what you believe, if you believe that Trump is literally going to destroy the country and uproot the foundations of our constitutional order and basically, engage in mass extermination, then it would seem like it would be your moral obligation to do things other than tweet hashtags or beg Robert Mueller to come and save you, or finagle this whistleblower complaint that led to the current impeachment episode. That doesn't seem like it quite cuts it in the case of a dictator scenario. If I felt that he was a dictator, for example, and I felt that he was, a Franco or something, I would feel morally compelled to engage in resistance to that in a manner that could potentially sacrifice my own life. I mean, I don't want to get too melodramatic, but I'm just saying that's not the situation we're in, so that's not my calculus. That's why I don't employ that kind of rhetoric. But they do, and yet their actions don't match up with it. Joe says, keep it up with the funny little GIF with a dancing pear, it looks like. A pear? It's a dancing pear who is lifting weights. Okay. Thank you. Sparky has another comment. You just don't like Tulsi because she can surf. Don't know what that means. She's snowboarding next week. They're having a snowboarding event. I won't be snowboarding, although I'll be attending the event, because if I were to snowboard, there's probably a 15 or 20% chance that I would end up dead. And I don't want to die on a mountain in New Hampshire, at least right now. Maybe if my life really deteriorates later on, I'll consider that a reasonable out. But as of now, I'd like to stay alive for a little while longer, and I don't want to end up face down in the frozen tundra because I thought it might be a good idea to try to snowboard. Never tried to snowboard, never plan on doing it. I did ski a couple times as a child, but that was enough. I'm more than happy to just passively observe and maybe throw a few snowballs at people. Sparky weighing in again. Sparky's spending a lot of money on this super chat, I have to say, tonight. You might fund an entire a fill up of my gas tank. So thank you. Sparky continues. I know leadership. Tulsi can control an audience. Your girl, Liz Warren, folds at the least hint of heckling or pushback from the audience. Liz Warren is my girl? I didn't realize that. Can you cite a statement that I have made where I indicate that Liz Warren is my girl? I'm skeptical that you could find such a statement, although I did praise her and thank her for defending Greenwald yesterday, which I frankly didn't expect. So Liz did gain back a couple brownie points for me, although I'm still highly suspicious of her candidacy overall. Yeah, let me so the other thing about Rogan is one thing I don't understand, or I do understand it, but one thing that it's just amazing to observe is how these people who so what they really want to do is cancel Bernie, right? So Bernie had to disavow and disassociate from Rogan because these online hall monitors came up with some old clips of Joe Rogan saying untoward things about gender and sexuality and stuff. And so the idea is that you have to somehow be that Bernie is now accountable because he made up this little video highlighting that Rogan expressed support for him. The idea is that Bernie is now accountable for everything that Rogan has ever said in his entire life. It's the same logic which tries to stigmatize you, for example, going on Fox News. I've incurred this myself when I've gone on Fox News or when I go on other right-wing media. They'll say, you go on them? Wow, that means you must be okay with 10,000 other things that I can show you that I said in like 1998 and 2006. Just like, no, appearing on a program with someone or speaking to someone in no way compels you to make a judgment one way or another on all their past statements. I wouldn't expect you, if you talk to me on my YouTube stream, on a podcast, if I were to have a TV show, I wouldn't expect you, by your mere presence, to be indicating that you support anything that I do, except you support accepting my invitation to come on the show. And if you incidentally agree with something that we discussed over the course of the conversation, fine, but you're accountable for what you say there, not for what I said in 2011 or something. So that basic logic where somehow Bernie is culpable for Joe Rogan's, I mean, how nonsensical is that? Bernie is culpable for what Joe Rogan said about Caitlyn Jenner in 2015. What? Step back and kind of think about what you're positing there. It's just not a sustainable formula. It means that you can never engage on a constructive level with anybody if they have to be 100% pure. And in fact, as somebody in one of the super chats mentioned, it in particular precludes you from engaging with working class people who generally don't abide by the whole speech codes that you might have as second nature if you're a graduate of Oberlin College and you've attended multiple seminars on the correct way to address 1,000, different pronouns. That's not the life experience of most people who you could conceivably get into your political coalition, but not if you're going to declare them deplorables, right? Because every now and then they might say something that's a little dicey with regard to transgenders or what have you. Sparky, more commentary. Sparky's spending a fortune on this live chat, but I like it. Keep it coming. Sparky says, just yanking your chain about Liz, Michael. Better for me to spend money on supporting an honest journalist than on overindulgence on food and booze. Okay, so if you have that rationalization where you are saying it's a better investment to spend the money on me rather than going out on the town for a nice porterhouse steak or something or a bottle of wine, okay, good. I accept that. I accept if I can help if in that way I can help you improve your life habits. Yeah, I'm all for it, especially if it means that I get like $30 because that fills up my gas tank as I'm traversing around New Hampshire. Thankfully, the gas tax in New Hampshire is relatively low, so I'm not wasting lots of money on a tax, which is actually a regressive tax. And believe it or not, I've written about before Trump and before people could focus on when people could focus on things that had nothing to do with Trump. There was like a period of a month or so where I did actually research and come to a judgment on whether I supported the gas tax. But it's funny because that was like, I want to say 2014 or 15. And now I can't even conceive of myself having the mental flexibility to be able to delve into something like that, which is not great in a way. It's not healthy. And why am I moving my finger around in a circle like this? I don't know. What else? Let me refresh my memory. Oh yeah, and another thing on Rogan. Okay, let's say he has made statements that you disagree with or you find bigoted or whatever. I don't think he is bigoted at all. But let's say you believe that. If the project is to have your preferred candidate have the widest possible resonance in the electorate, then having support from Joe Rogan is a no-brainer. I don't know if he's the most influential person on the internet, but he's up there. So that's just what you have to do if you want to build a popular movement. And of course, nobody bats an eye if Bernie would go on like Stephen Colbert or something, right? But Stephen Colbert has made insufferable statements too. Stephen Colbert is not. I can't bear to watch Stephen Colbert. I think it's awful. But if I wanted to, I'm sure I could go find something that would make Stephen Colbert out to be cancelable. But I wouldn't do that because it's just ridiculous. Okay, more from Sparky. Sparky's like my best friend here. Sparky, you should be my business manager at this point. He says, I'm an old guy, well past my on the town days. Okay. Now, did you notice that Joe Rogan is the top trending topic trending topic on Twitter, where people are venting their outrage because of this Bernie stuff. But other candidates get endorsements from like corrupt bankers and CIA spooks and people who have exponentially more moral blemishes on their record than a Joe Rogan. And nobody bats an eye. Nobody is calling for denunciations or disavowals. It's only because of Joe Rogan's sordid past of saying mean things about Caitlyn Jenner. I mean, who gives a it's just not a consistent standard that these people apply, which is why I don't feel which is why I treat them with total contempt. They don't like me anyway, so I have nothing to lose. People, some non-super chat comments are asking, was Joe Rogan canceled? No, I mean canceled in the figurative sense. And in fact, like I mentioned from the outset of this conversation, I should have said really that Bernie is the one who people were demanding be canceled as a result of his embrace of Rogan. And there's no one, and Joe Rogan show cannot be canceled because he owns it, right? So he's not at the mercy of a TV network or something. I guess YouTube could just terminate his show, but I'm sure he'd still have an audience. Aaron asks, "Will you at the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee?" Yeah. Yes, the answer to that is yes. Although that's far off now that I can't give you any precise details. And I've heard that the hotel situation in Milwaukee is crazy. So they're probably all booked right now, and you have to stay like an hour and a half away. And I don't know, maybe somebody who lives in Milwaukee can put me up or something. So if you live in Milwaukee and you have a spare room or whatever, hit me up because that would probably be helpful in July. Thoughts on red flag gun laws? I have a rough idea of what you're talking about, but you're gonna have to give me a little bit more of specifics for me to really comment on that intelligently. Zippity Day says, "Thank you for being consistently reasonable." Well, thank you for conveying that in the form of a super chat. Would you like me to sing the Zippity Doodah Zippity Day song? Because I can. I'll whistle it. There you go. You're welcome. You got your money's worth. Somebody mentions Mike Bloomberg for some reason. I just had the TV on here in the room because I was watching Tulsi's appearance on Laura Ingraham, and of course a Mike Bloomberg ad comes on, and he has all these micro targeted, highly issue specific ads because he has like 1,000 ads running in different markets on TV, internet, and everywhere. And he has an impeachment ad, and it's Mike Bloomberg trying to sound earnest and strident, saying the Senate must do its job and remove Trump from office. But if they don't get the job done, we'll get it done together in November. Mike Bloomberg 2020. It's like, really? Does anyone actually sincerely believe that the passion he's trying to exude there is real? I mean, if you support him in a way, I guess I get it. But the idea that you believe that the phony passion he's trying to present there just sort of strains credulity for me. Okay, more from Sparky. Sparky, I don't know if you're gonna be able to retire anymore as a result of all the money you're blowing on this live chat, but I'm not going to complain. Sparky says, if Joe Rogan still live streamed like Jimmy Dore, his stream would be interrupted by the Internet Warfare Unit at England AFB, Florida, like Jimmy's is. Really? Did Jimmy's live stream get interrupted by England AFB? Oh, by the way, you can go onto Jimmy's channel and see, I think it's 2 segments from our live stream. So it's not the entirety of the live stream that we did on Monday. But it's, I think, the majority of it. And if you want to hear the whole thing, I think you can get the podcast version. Oh, and by the way, Jimmy Dore is coming to New Hampshire for a Tulsi event on February 1st or 2nd, I think. So if you're around, come out for that. What else we got? So he says, what's the perfect storm that gets Bloomberg the nomination? It's a good question. I've sussed that out in my mind. I think what would have to happen is a decidedly mixed result in the first 4 states. So it had to be the most chaotic result possible, which would probably be that there's a different winner in each of the 4 states. So let's say Warren pulls an upset in Iowa. I'm just kind of spitballing here. Warren pulls an upset in Iowa, right? So everybody thought Bernie had a good chance of winning. He doesn't win. Warren wins. Biden pulls an upset in New Hampshire. I'm not saying any of these things are necessarily likely. I'm just saying what is the scenario where Bloomberg could swoop in. Bernie wins Nevada. Okay. And then Biden wins South Carolina. Or actually, let's say Pete wins. So Warren wins. Let me start over. Warren wins Iowa. Pete wins New Hampshire. Bernie wins Nevada. Biden wins South Carolina. So split result in the first 4 early states. Mike Bloomberg could then come in and say, look, the party is chaotic. They can't decide. We got to unite. I have the resources. I've already invested heavily in all the Super Tuesday states. So none of these people have shown that they have what it takes to coalesce quickly around a nominee, and that's what we need to do in order to defeat Trump. We can't waste any more time on a divisive primary with candidates getting small pluralities of delegates. I'm your guy. And he just absolutely floods all the early primary, all the Super Tuesday states. So California, Washington, Texas. And people buy into it. I mean, it's not a likely scenario, I don't think necessarily, but it's not 100% implausible. It could happen. And he's gone up in the polls quite a bit. He overtook Pete in the national polling averages. So the money, he's got a return on his money to some extent. It's funny how, like, obviously money does buy you votes still, at least around the margins. Tom Steyer is at 10%, or he's like number 3 in South Carolina purely because he purchased tons of ads and tons of mailers and voter outreach type stuff. But nationally, Steyer's nowhere. Bloomberg is in like 4th place nationally, again purely because of the ad buy. So you can't deny that it has some effect, which is why if you go look at my video that I did on this channel right when Bloomberg announced, I was saying take Bloomberg seriously. It's not a joke. This is not a joke. This is one of the wealthiest people in the entire United States. I think he's the 8th wealthiest person in the country, saying he's going to spend whatever it takes. So that's not something to be laughed off. That's a threat. Somebody says, I can't stand Colbert either. A self-righteous liberal who thinks is brilliant but never goes after the war machine or the establishment. He'll gladly give blowjobs to the big at the CIA. Yeah, I mean, one reason why Joe Rogan has a lot of popularity, I think, is because these political comedy shows are just all the same now. So at least Joe Rogan is funny, but like, Joe Rogan is a comedian, right? But his podcast isn't necessarily the comedy genre. It's not like he's always trying to be funny with a scripted routine, right? It's just sort of funny because certain things in life are funny without trying to be. And these guys like Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel, who else? Samantha Bee, all these people. I mean, it's just there's nothing adventurous about their comedy. I'm not a huge fan of comedy anyway, of the comedy genre. Like when people like comedy movies and stuff. Never been my thing because I just don't find it funny. I like when stuff is funny without trying to be. I like when stuff is subtly funny. Like The Sopranos, for instance, was hilarious, but it wasn't a comedy show. It was because there were funny scenarios that intelligent writers created and had good dialogue. With Colbert, it just seems like it's always they're forcing it down your throat in a way that I find more painful than funny. I mean, the infamous Colbert segment that I can recall is when he did like a ridiculous homage to Robert Mueller. But remember when Saturday Night Live did the "All I Want for Christmas Is You" in 2018, and the "you" that they wanted for Christmas was Mueller, and they had like a big portrait of Mueller with a Santa hat. Just like I don't find any of that funny at all. I find it more pathetic. Um, Colbert is exposed as a. Don't want to say anything that's potentially slanderous. Sorry. Aaron says, we're booking an Airbnb house right now, 15 minutes from downtown Milwaukee for independent. Oh, okay. Let me look you up on Twitter. Oh, yeah, I recognize. I think I recognize your handle. Okay, I'll contact. Okay, gotcha. Sorry to be cryptic, but one of the super chat guys, just told me about something that could potentially work as lodging in Milwaukee. Yeah, again, it's far off, so I don't know what I'm going to be up to, but yeah, that's a good option. Thank you. Um, yeah, we wish you a Mueller Christmas, stuff like that. It's just like that whole instinct to have. Part of the reason why I'm so critical and aggravated by this impeachment stuff because it's an extension of the same sensibility which brought you stuff like we wish you a Mueller Christmas. Right now it would be we wish you a Ukraine phone call Christmas or something. So it's the same mentality. It's just evolves slightly over time. Colbert as his conservative persona. This is what Jameson says. Colbert as his conservative persona before taking over the Late Show was brilliant, though. Some of the things as he did that character were hilarious. I never watched it consistently. I would watch it here and there, and I remember being somewhat entertained by the novelty of it. But I don't know. Even that persona, I feel like the novelty wore off pretty quickly. I just don't. I just think that if you're an intelligent consumer of news, there are just better ways to spend your time. I remember when there was a burst of attention around like the Daily Show voter who got all their information from the Daily Show. It's just like I get watching the Daily Show, right? At least during the Jon Stewart era. But if that's the only mode by which you consume information, you're still almost just as impoverished as your average viewer of CNN or Fox News. Like when I talk to somebody, like there was a voter today at one of Tulsi's town halls. Not to diminish this guy, but you could tell right away, and he was one of the minority of Republicans who are always there. You could tell right away that he pretty much gets all his information from Fox News, and that's how he knew about her. It's just sad to me. It's just not. It doesn't lend itself to a real understanding of the state of their country. If you just kind of passively sit there and your eyes glaze over and you're just watching Fox News all day. And it doesn't, Fox News has its own issues. I would say the same thing for one of these robotic MSNBC or CNN viewers. It's the medium. The medium does not. The medium is the message, right? If you should actually read that book, if you have it. The medium is about subduing you and making you a passive consumer. And I say this is somebody who has been on these networks, but you're just not going to be. You're not going to have a firm, independent grasp of the issues at hand if you just passively receive this information. You're just going to be parroting what they're force feeding you, and it's just sad and dispiriting when I come across somebody, whether it's an MSNBC viewer or a Fox viewer, where you can tell that their entire opinion on things is formed exclusively by their TV watching habits. Sparky, keeping it alive here with the continued contributions. Thank you. Now maybe I can retire based on just what you've given over the course of this super chat. He says, or she, don't want to assume anything. Says comedy began to suck when Michael came of age. I never liked comedy that much. I think I've discussed that on here before and elsewhere. I mean, I can chuckle at things occasionally, but whenever I watch something that's like branded as comedy, I always have in the back of my mind, wow, I'd rather be doing something else. Even good comedy. Yeah, I liked it a little bit when I was younger, but I feel like I grew out of it. My favorite was Mitch Hedberg because it wasn't pretentious at all. It was just he had these incredibly snappy and hilarious like one-liners. um, Somebody says I can't stand Facebook because of MSM news viewing friends all cheering for the impeachment. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I grant, and I fully recognize that most people can't devote large chunks of their lives to becoming somewhat sophisticated news consumers. It's just not what they're not interested enough in it to do that. But when you see them just parroting whatever the standard corporate media line is, it is dispiriting. All right, everybody. Over an hour now. It's 12:56. I hope this was mildly entertaining and or edifying. Somebody just gave me a final super chat, and the GIF on this super chat appears to be the pair. It's the same pair as before, and now it's hopping up and down and celebrating and says number one fan. Well, thank you. Yeah. Somebody just gave a Mitch Hedberg line. I used to do drugs. I still do. I used to too. I mean, that's all you need to say. That's brilliant. I was in a Barnes and Noble recently, and I thought of Mitch Hedberg because there was an out of order escalator. So there was a sign that says like, "Sorry, escalator currently out of order." And the Mitch Hedberg joke, one of his I think most famous jokes, was an escalator can never be broken. It can just become stairs, right? And it's just like the brilliance of that is like everybody just immediately recognizes how true that is, but they never had kind of conceived of it in their minds. But he sort of gives voice to it in the form of this joke, and I always like that. Sparky, maybe his final live chat of the night after he's blown his entire savings. Worked with Euro elites after wall came down. I'm assuming he means Berlin Wall. They cared about regular people, but their grandchildren, such as Emmanuel Macron, don't. Okay, I'll just accept that as a statement, not a question or anything. And one final gift from Joe, who has the pair. I guess YouTube has its. I wasn't aware of this, but I guess the standard YouTube GIF for super chats is this little dancing pear man or figure or maybe it's a woman. I don't know that it has a specific gender identity. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. I'll be back probably at approximately the same time tomorrow, filling you in on all the latest happenings and making jokes and maybe even doing the Batman voice again. That wasn't good. Maybe even doing the Batman voice. Anyway. All right. Nighty night.